Davidson County Election Commission, and I'd note that Councilman Stein is here along with Councilman Pridemore. And I'd turn it over to you to make introductions and then whatever budget presentation you'd like to make.
I'm Ron Buchanan. I'm chairman of the Davidson County Election Commission. To my left is our Administrator of Elections, Kent Wall. To his left is Joan Nixon, who's the Deputy Administrator. And to my right, Bill Hayden, who's our Chief Financial Officer. We're glad to be here today. We would like to hopefully extend our record of trying to get some more money for the Election Commission so that we can adequately do our job. Over the last few years, the mayor and the council have assisted us in that goal and granted some additional funds. We're to the point now that we're just bare bones level. And the problem is we have no backups for anybody. And with an election, if somebody gets sick, we can't just say, well, we'll put it off and wait until they get well. If somebody gets sick at a crucial time, we could have a disastrous election. So at this point in time, I think we had good elections last year, but we always run extremely nervous. So with that said, I'll turn it over to Mr. Wall, who will make the budget presentation.
Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor, gentlemen. My name is Kent Wall. I'm the administrator. This month marks my 18th month in this capacity. My job this afternoon is to present the Davidson County Election Commission budget and to be available to answer any questions that you might have about that. I had a document that I had asked to be inserted into your notebooks. It's a format that I used last year and one that Mr. Riebling thought would be in order. So we're using it again this year. Let me begin this with a little bit of background. I had been in this job about 90 days when I realized that we were understaffed, underfunded, and would probably not be able to correct the shortcomings that had been pointed out in the state report, and we would be hard-pressed to actually execute the election cycle for 2014. And with those findings, the chairman and I met with Mr. Riebling, who removed some of the shackles and allowed us to do some things that really needed doing to enable us to start going after some of the big issues. So that was a big help. We began with renewed vigor, knowing that we had some support down that we could get about the problem. If you'll turn with me, please, to page 3, you'll see a little bit of the budget recap for the Election Commission by selected fiscal years. And on the FY16 budget, the current budget, our original request was $3,262,000, of which a little over $2 million was actually classified as the mayor's proposal. However, Councilman Stein, who was acting or was chairman at the time, got us another $338,000. And down below that, you'll see the breakdown of those funds and where they were deployed. $261,000 of that went to early voting sites for August and November elections. And we had one staff position in our IT group, which was also funded. This was a major help. Page 4 is really just a recap of the particular elements of the current budget, showing the mayor's proposal, what the difference was, and the fact that had we not gotten the additional funding from Councilman Stein and his efforts, our budget had been reduced almost 39% beyond lower than our request. And it came in some very important areas, one of which we'll talk about again a little bit later, is an increase in salary or pay for poll workers. Page 5 is really a look at the core staff. This is the staff that is the permanent positions, not the part-time positions, and does not include commissioners. But we've been struggling to get back to the 08 manning level, and we're below that. We have an authorized manning level of 26 full-time. We can only fund 21 of those. So we'll be talking in our request for this new fiscal year for a way to get that addressed. I guess one of the questions that perhaps needs to be answered is how did we do in 14? We knew that there were critical areas. One was recruiting, one was training, and the other one was to pull off the election cycle. Let me address recruiting. In the year prior to my joining the Election Commission, the Election Commission received 35 applications for poll workers, 28 of which were actually added to the rolls. Part of my finding after my 90-day stint was that we were in the hole for poll workers and would be hard-pressed to man the polling locations. So we set about recruiting. Some of the additional latitude that Mr. Riebling gave us was to enable us to do that. We received 1,174 new applications for poll workers, of which 66% of those were actually added onto the rolls. And why the difference? A small percentage of those are out of county or underage or not registered to vote. The biggest majority of those is because of the paperwork that is required to be put on the Metro payroll. A poll worker has to submit the same level of information, same documents as any full-time Metro employee, and that's a hindrance. That is an issue with getting these all the way completed. I'm grateful for the 775 that we were able to add. Don't misunderstand. But we're back in the recruiting business again in this year. For training, we made some significant changes. We went to smaller classes with more hands-on opportunity to work with the equipment. We had labs that people could go back to on their free time, and these classes were increased to 3 hours each. Now, with smaller classes and knowing that we had to train everybody for the elections that were coming up, all the new people and the veterans, we had to go to another setup for trainers, and we had 5 poll officers who volunteered their time to be trainers for us. The training for the May and August elections was mandatory for all poll workers. For November, we relaxed that a bit, and if you were new, you had to go to training, but if you'd already been to training earlier in the year, you didn't have to go back. What does that really mean? We had 234 classes that were conducted in 14. There were 2,953 attendees. Obviously, some of those are multiple for the different elections. That represented 7,812 student hours. So the training got a lot of emphasis from us. How about the elections? Early voting is something that sometimes gets overlooked in terms of what we have to do to pull that off. Early voting sites in May was 7, 10 in August, and 11 in November. The average deployment for all 3 of those elections across all voting sites from us was 113 poll officials, 56 computers, and 93 voting machines. Now, interestingly, nearly 50% that voted in all 3 of those elections, almost 50%, voted early. And that was part of our push, was to get an early voting turnout to reduce any lines on Election Day. On Election Day, we had 3 countywide elections, and we had 5 city elections last year. We had 161 locations. On average, we had 410 electronic poll books and printers, 550 voting machines, and an average of 1,200 poll officials, which is almost 150 more than worked in the presidential election in Davidson County in 12. So how about this budget that we're here to present to you today? If you look on page 6 of the planning guidelines that we used, this budget was unanimously approved by the commissioners in early February. We're in the process of individual meetings with council members, and we've already had a number, and those will continue. And we've met with Mr. Riebling and Mr. Cooper in this process already. So what were the guidelines? We want to continue to rebuild and improve the process that we started last year. In other words, we want to improve and we want to get better. We've got to conduct free and fair elections at all precincts, and that includes early voting as well as Election Day. We must have fully manned precincts, competently trained officials. We have to have all necessary equipment and supplies at the precincts, a big criticism in 2012, by the way. We have to have all necessary support staff and technicians in place, and we bring in technicians to provide us with quick response to any equipment issues at the precincts. We have to have backup equipment on standby in case something must be replaced. And we have to support, in this coming fiscal year, 3 elections countywide. Some other things we're focused on is increasing the voter information and education efforts to the citizens of Davidson County. We want to ensure that our voter database consists of only eligible voters. We have a new name for a group that handles several functions. We call it Special Voting Services. That includes absentee, it includes military, prison, nursing home, and early voting. It's now called Special Voting Services. We are asking, once again, we'll be asking for staff increase because that group only consists of one full-time manager and one part-time individual. We want to strengthen our voter registration staff. This is going to be an increasingly sensitive area as we move toward the 2016 election with a number of voter registrations that we anticipate will be coming in, and we got to get ready for it. So let's talk specifics now about the election. Our budget recommendation is $2,647,000 for all three elections. The first election is August of 15. That's the Metropolitan General Election. The commissioners have already approved 11 early voting sites for the number of days indicated. The cost of putting that on is $289,000. Election day, that's 161 locations. That's $575,000. And the total of that one election will be right at $864,000. September, we anticipate the runoff. It will simply be a repeat of what we did in August. And again, $864,000. And then in March of 16 will be the presidential preference primary, county primary, and the Berry Hill municipal election. Again, the template will be the same. It'll be $864,000. We'll have a City of Oak Hill election in June, and we'll have preparation for the August 16 election. Beginning 90 days prior to that election, we'll start spending money, as we are this year. And we budgeted that at $50,000. On staff, we're asking for $329,000, and here are the elements that make that up. We have 2 approved positions for recruiters. However, the funding that we received only does not equal half that. The difference is $97,000, and we're asking that those be fully funded. Because what we're doing now is we're paying those positions by taking it out of other areas in the staff budget. We'll be asking for 2 positions in Special Voting Services. That's a multi-year request, and 2 positions in voter registration staff. Each one of those is $116,000, each one of those areas. We also have, and we've been doing this for quite some time, we have 12 part-time people who work for us full-time. Average at $12 an hour is what they're paid. We couldn't do what we do without them. They're important. We want to get those reclassified from non-recurring into the recurring part of the Election Commission budget, and that would amount to $470,000 by doing that. The next area at the top of page 8 is an increase for poll officials. There was a request from last year. We're coming back with it. I gave Mr. Riebling a spreadsheet earlier that showed how Davidson County compares to the other counties. And if you looked at what the other counties pay on election day poll official, we're near the top. But where the variance occurs is what those counties are asking their officials to do. We have a different structure. We have a different way of running the precincts and the duties that are involved there. What we're asking to do is pretty significant. We're asking for an increase for the officer and the other positions in the precinct. Now, each election day, that expense, the impact in FY16 would be $48,000, and since we have 3 elections, the total of that is $145,000. The other area that we're woefully behind the other counties is what we pay to go to training. We're currently paying $15 for a 3-hour class. That does not include travel time to and from training, which is on Murfreesboro Road. We're proposing that that be increased to an effective $30, and that would amount to $25,000 budget impact per election cycle or training cycle, and there will only be 2 training cycles in this fiscal year, even though we have 3 elections. Next area is rental of electronic poll books. The Metro Council made a change to our contract with the supplier to enable us to rent up to 100 additional electronic poll books. The cost of that would be $105,000. We need those the way we're deployed right now. We have those from the supplier. I've been asked the question, well, why don't we just buy them? And the reason is that model of that equipment is not made anymore. The supplier does have units we can rent, and that's the route we're going. The next area is called voter outreach. Now, it's a small amount of money. It has significant impact. We're changing our message to the citizenry of Davidson County this year. It's a three-part message. Number one, register to vote. Number two, change your voter registration card if you've moved or your name has changed. Don't wait till Election Day to do that. And of course, we're talking about recruiting poll officials for the elections. Let me explain what the real impact of this change of address has on the Election Commission. In the November election, we actually processed on Election Day 4,048 changes of address. And that's a 20-minute process, each one easy. Can be 30 minutes to get that completed. So we want the voters to change this in advance. Don't get hung up on Election Day and create lines, even though we have moved that function away from the regular lines coming to the precinct. It's still there and provides a bottleneck for those that must change their records. We also are asking for voter registration enhancement here for the staff. We need 3 part-time positions to ensure the records are current and accurate, and we're approaching a high-volume period, as I mentioned. Page 9 is simply a recap of our request. You can see that 70% of the request is for the elections, 12% is for the part-time personnel, roughly 9% is for the staff increases, and then the rest of it tails off from there. And then when we net that against the adjustments and the 3% reduction, we're at $1,866,000 as our request for recurring and non-recurring funding. If we get this, we will be able to continue what we started. I'm pretty pleased with the progress that we've made. The reason that occurred, by the way, is the staff bought into what we wanted to do. They got behind it. I don't want anybody to think that the leadership was responsible. We played a role, but clearly the staff got behind this, and I think that we'll continue to do that. I think they'll be there to make sure we have a smooth election cycle in the new fiscal year. The last couple of pages are simply some comparisons to prior years and so on, but I'll stop my remarks at this point and ask if there might be any questions.
Okay, so the total request to be on page 9, is that?
Yes, it's $3,000,008
That's
prior to the adjustments and the 3% reduction.
2,005,000 or 6 of that is for the elections. Just make sure to run the 3 elections. And you didn't mention this, but now we do get the money from the state.
Yes, I failed to mention that.
Primary, right?
For the March presidential primary, that will be reimbursed to the Metro General Fund by the state. Of course, we have to process the paperwork to get it. But in 12, I'm told that it was 100% funded.
okay. So what does that leave us with?
It's about, I don't have my numbers, about $1.3 million of improvements after you get past the elections, give or take. I may be off a little bit of money, but it's about $1.3 million of improvements is what the request is for the various things that Mr.
Right.
Wall outlined.
And is there a page that sort of specifies what the $1.3 million is for?
The closest will probably occur on
I don't have that picture from me, but it's,
either 10 or pages 10 or 11. When you look at the breakdown of the FY16 elements compared to what we had in 15,
poll officials.
see the increase in the election side,
I see, okay. So you have elections at the top, and then you got
Right.
the other, okay.
those are the various elements there. You can see that some of these we're not asking for again, or they weren't asked for before. We're not asking for them going forward, so it's a little bit of an apples and oranges comparison. But that's the quickest way, I think, to look at the comparison.
Easier to sort of look for if we think where we are now.
And page 11, just as a quick note,
9 through...
the FY15 number is actually what the council finally approved, which includes the increase that the council, supplemental that the council gave to us back in June.
So 9 through 18 is sort of what makes up the all other request outside of elections.
So the part-time positions, you're not talking about making them full-time, are you?
No, we're talking about the need for part-time workers regardless. I'll give you an example, Mr. Mayor. In August, there was a petition drive, and we had to process, we actually processed 16,000 signature verifications. Now, we don't have the staff to do that. We have to bring in part-time people, we have to train them, we have to have the equipment available. Those events are going to occur throughout the year.
So you're saying this is like a reoccurring expense?
It's a
that you just wanna-
reoccurring expense, a need, let's say a need, and the expense that goes with it.
Full-time recruiter,
The next two they're people they have on board, but they're just really to increase not to increase the salary, but to pay them what they're making.
That's correct.
Give them additional funds we gave them some money to hire the people. The salaries were higher than what the money had for, but they hired them, and now this would give them the money to pay them.
use other funds he had to
Yeah.
pay, okay.
Well, it was because Mr. Riebling allowed us to move money within the Election Commission budget.
He doesn't take the shackles off everybody.
Well, it was not a small conversation, I can assure you.
Well, there's never been a small conversation when it relates to the election commission.
Proposing changing the poll officials' compensation too. Is it in this presentation somewhere specific?
It's, yes, it is. It's on page 8. By the way, the last increase was in 2011.
Right.
The training rate clearly we're out of step with what's
I
going
remember
on.
last year you talking about,
Sheet, which I'm here with afterwards, and it lays all the other counties.
yeah,
all that
I'd like
out.
to see it. I remember last year you talking about having a concern that maybe that was a retention issue or a recruiting issue. Is that still the case?
It's a recruiting issue, but
But it sounds like the recruiting's going pretty well.
the recruiting is, but I can tell you it's a sore point with those that are saying, okay, I'll do it. But when they find out we have a 3-hour class that they have to go to, it's a little prejudiced look, jaundiced look, I suppose, in the classes. And I think the council members, based on what they're telling me, they're hearing about this from their constituents as well. But it's not just training. If you look back at the current rate we pay a poll worker, it's $120 at a 14-hour day, minimum 14 hours. That's $8.57 an hour. And they work a long day. And frankly, they make it happen. They're the ones.
Okay. You got any more?
Nope.
No, we've several weeks.
All right, thank you.
Yes, sir.